Compost tea. Join me as I go through the effort of finding out whether compost tea is really worth it or not. Hey guys, it's Daryl, Louisiana Sublime. Thanks for coming again today. In my previous video, Feed the Soil and Not the Plant, I talked about all the biological interaction that goes on within a good soil and how important that is to get your plants, get the nutrients they need to grow and be healthy. I'll put a link down below for that video. It's worth watching. So I heard about compost tea. I've never used it, never made some. It's purported to be a good organic type of fertilizer you can give your plants and your soil that affects the chemistry again because it's organic in nature. Helps with the microbe, biology, health, and all that. And so I wanted to just go ahead and try to brew up some compost tea. Did a little research about whether the pros and cons, is it worthwhile or not, and we'll cover that in this video today. And if it does turn out that it is worthwhile, then it maybe it's just another tool in our toolkit, our arsenal to keep our soil healthy, which makes our plants grow. Remember, feed the soil, not the plants. So please post in the comments down below your experience with compost tea. How has it worked for you? Is it beneficial? Did you see any good or bad from it? Please share your experience. It can help everybody on the channel. Also, we have our Spring Garden 101 series. It's 11 videos that takes you through the whole process of sowing seeds, inside, outside. If you got to build a new raised bed, or do you have to amend a bed that you already have, kind of takes you through the whole process. So very informative. Check that video series out as well. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. It means a lot to the channel. Like that video, and feel free to share it. Well, let's get started. So first off, what is compost tea? A good aerobic compost tea, it creates the environment for various microbes, bacteria, all those things that are important for the health of your soil. It gives it a medium to grow those microbes in. It's oxygenated, so it's able to feed those microbes. And then ultimately something that you can apply to your soil, and foliar application to the plants as well. And that's the whole deal with about, is it worth it or not, compost tea. And so a lot of the recommendations around compost tea is more anecdotal. There's not an absolute ton of scientific studies. And even if there were, though, it's very difficult to do a scientific study with any validity, because each person who makes their compost tea, each time it will be different. It may be a difference of the compost you have in there. It may be a difference between how long you're oxygenating the tea. There's so many different variables going into it. It's kind of hard to say this compost tea is perfect for this application. Nevertheless, if compost tea does the benefits or provides the benefits that it says it does, then this just may be another tool in our toolkit to stay organic and keep our soil where it needs to be, which ultimately puts your plants where they need to be, and then get a good harvest from those plants. Alright, so this is a kit I found from Tea Lab to make compost tea. Found it on Amazon, just thought I'd give it a try. So, take the lid off here. This is their, I guess their oxygenator bubble up deal. So it's got little holes in here. So we got that. They also have this life cube, 5-gallon 2-pack fish ball. Alright, they got some Beetlejuice mealworm castings. Okay, this is the net that all your compost goes into when it bubbles in. So it's got a nice fine mesh. There's a variety of things in this pack. Number one, there is a laminated lab bag instructions on one side and compost tea recipes on the other side. And finally, the motor. So we got an air pump. Alright, so the first step is to go ahead and put some water in here, and we'll put the bubbler going and bubble it for 2 hours. And that's to try to leach out any chlorine that's in the water. Alright, so got all that hooked up. Got the tubing going from that to the motor. It's actually not too loud, not near as bad as I thought it would be. I gotta figure out how to keep this down. Bubbling up, we'll go let that go for 2 hours, and we'll come back and get ready to start making some tea. Alright, so we went ahead and did the oxidator for 2 hours to get any chlorine out. Next up, what you gotta do is get the, we're gonna do a kind of a basic recipe. It's compost in our castings, fish hydro slate powder, or molasses instead of fish. So what I'm going to do is probably, it came with 2 bags of the compost. So I'm going to go ahead and use one of those, and I'm going to use also some from my compost bin. So we'll pour a little bit of this in here. It's about 2 cups, maybe a little more. And I'm going to go ahead and pour in this one. We clip it. And we hang it like that. So we'll go ahead and hang it in here. And we clip it on here. Okay. Submerge it. And we're just going to let it oxygenate. Alright, so get that started. I'm going to also add these fish balls. There's all kind of things you can add to it, like that kelp powder and the humic acid. I'm just going to do it basic. And if it's a plant that's really in need, you can do kind of a 1-to-1, but they recommend 10-to-1. Water 10, right, and one of your compost tea, so it thins it out a little bit. So we're going to keep it on for 48 hours. Alright, this compost tea has been brewing for about 48 hours. I had it in my shop. I can tell you one thing, the smell is just not something that's real agreeable. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and go with kind of a 10-to-1 ratio. Let me give it a little bit of pour in here. So how do we apply it? There's 2 primary ways that you go about applying your compost tea. So the first being soil drench, just like you pour out a water can, onto your plant and your soil. Or you can do a foliar spray, just spray a fine mist of it on the leaves. And some studies have shown, promising results from both different ways. Soil drench, that's more kind of getting to your soil chemistry, your microbes down into to support all that life, all the organisms down within the soil. But the foliar spray, that's kind of typically used, or people talk about it being used, as the microbes on the leaves help prevent it from getting disease. Again, somewhat anecdotal, but you can try it both ways. So there are a number of reported benefits for using compost tea. Let's cover those right now. So happy soil, happy plants. So the microbes in the compost tea, the idea is it goes down into that soil, it affects the chemistry, keeps it healthy, which results in better plants, which means better harvest. Alright, so we can stay organic. That's another key benefit. I'm 100% organic in my backyard, in my garden. I'd much rather add some compost tea than I would wanting to add some kind of 13-13-13 synthetic fertilizer. It just gives us another tool. If it in fact works, it gives us just another tool that we're able to apply to get our soil health where it needs to be, which ultimately gives you a better harvest. So inexpensive. By applying compost tea, your plants are healthier. You don't have to buy a whole bunch of expensive fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, those kind of things, assuming that the compost tea not only provides those nutrients, but it also helps to defend disease. It's easy to make. It's not easy to be consistent and make the exact same thing every time, but it is pretty easy to make. You basically, as long as you got some aerator, whether it be a pump for your aquarium. I got this particular kit that has a good pump in it, and it does have some materials you can use, but you can use straight old compost right out of your compost bin, or you can get compost at your local nursery and be able to use that as well. So everybody can do it, and it's pretty inexpensive to do. And so with the right equipment, you'd be able to do it. Anybody can actually go and make some compost tea. It's not that difficult. And you may get quicker benefits of the nutrients as well as the microorganisms. So if you do a foliar spray, that's a much more immediate effect on the plant, as opposed to the techniques I use, which is, you know, pure compost. And maybe do a little bit of some 5-1-1, whatever the fish and kelp, fish emulsion kelp kind of organic fertilizer. But it just, again, it's another organic way to go ahead and keep our soil healthy and our plants healthy, giving us a good harvest. Now, while there's a lot of people that promote compost tea, there are some out there who kind of try to debunk it. Inconsistency, I've mentioned before, it's kind of difficult to be consistent in hitting your compost tea. You could actually oxygenate it a shorter or longer period. That'll have an effect on the microbes and the amount of microbes. Now the compost you use, that'll have a big impact on you know, the end result of what you got from your compost tea. So there's a lot of things in there that help prevent you from being really consistent. So in that case, the amount of nutrients and or microbes that are in your compost tea at the end of the day, it's hard to be consistent. It's hard to know exactly what you got. And of course your compost tea may be different. Your plant needs are going to be different as well. So it's just kind of hard to be consistent from what you have from your compost tea and be able to really understand what it's doing to your plants. As I've heard somebody say, gardening is local. So it's even local down to the plant within your bed. It may have some specific needs from that one part of your garden bed versus another. The lack of scientific proof is another kind of debunker, right? So there are some studies that show that there are some benefits, but there's also plenty that show that there's really not any, or at least it can't be scientifically proven because of all the different variables. So you can go in a lab and kind of erase a lot of those variables and get some kind of result, but you just don't know how it's going to apply to an imperfect world out in your garden. You know, it's a little time consuming. It takes 48 hours, give or take, to brew up some compost tea. It's not like you're out there hand paddling for 48 hours. You're using your pump. Those pumps are kind of loud too. Nevertheless, it does take a little bit of time to get that in place. So a lot of the ones who do debunk or who don't think that it's worthwhile to use compost tea typically says the following: that number one, if you want to use compost tea, it's probably not going to hurt anything, so go for it. But number two is, there's no need to use compost tea if you use compost. So I amend my beds with compost on an annual, if not a seasonal basis. So I know that there's plenty of compost, and it's continually, I'm adding to it and it's breaking down, and it's used up, but I add more and it's breaking down. So I'm just not sure. I don't often use an organic fertilizer, and when I do, it's usually fish emulsion, seaweed kind of fertilizer. But this may be another thing we can try. So should compost tea be used in the garden? Look at a couple studies and results. According to some research a few years back at Kentucky State University, they basically were able to detect that there was a nutrient increase or intake into the roots within an hour after applying compost tea. That sounds like it's got some promise. And of course, a foliar or misting application does allow for the plant to absorb the nutrients and all that from your compost tea quicker than it would be doing a soil drench. Other research suggests that compost tea does better in certain specific deficiencies of minerals, like deficient in zinc and calcium, for example. There's been some studies that show that actually provides an uptick of those particular macronutrients. Other studies show that your compost tea won't make your plants significantly bigger, but they will help the harvest, and they'll make bigger produce. In a trial that was conducted in the Hawaii University, basically applied compost tea weekly, and they did not see a substantial increase in the size of the plants. On the flip side, though, some farmers did find that their harvest was about 800 pounds higher for the areas that they had the compost tea applied versus those that didn't. So again, there's some studies, and like anything, there's studies probably either way, and just a lot of anecdotal, historical experience thrown in there. And it makes me think that, hey, this may be a tool. I'm going to try it out. Again, for those reasons about it not being a scientific deal, I'm going to apply it to a couple different of the same type of tomatoes. It's not going to be an apples versus apples, right? It'll be kind of apples versus orange, just in the sense that different plants are going to be in different parts of their life cycle. Even though they're about the same age, there may be more compost in one side versus another. So there's a lot of variables that could just kind of throw that thing off. So again, one more tool on our bag that we can use to try to keep our soil healthy, which end results in the robust harvest. And regardless, always make sure you maintain the tried and true method like I talked about last video, which is feed the soil, not the plant, and you will have a great sustainable garden. Thanks for coming back out to Louisiana Simple Living. Soil health is the absolute most critical thing you can try to understand, and the things that you do, your activities in your garden should be to support that. I heard about compost tea, everybody hears about it. Never really tried to use it, never brewed it, so I thought it'd be worthwhile because it is an organic way to keep your soil healthy. And so wanted to at least pursue looking at the pros and cons of using compost tea, as well as go and brew some up and try it out. And that's what we did today. Actually, that's what we did over a couple days. And I'm gonna try it on some plants, just see how it goes. If you've had experiences with compost tea, good or bad, please post some comments down below. I'd like for everyone to be able to share the knowledge and experience that you guys have, you know, from your experience with compost tea. And most important, just remember, feed the soil and not the plant, and you'll have a great sustainable garden with a great harvest. Just a reminder, check out my Spring Garden 101 series. I mentioned it earlier. Check it out, it's 11 videos, very informative. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like that video, and as always, feel free to share it. As I always like to remind people, spend time with family, spend time with friends. Do it now rather than later. And as always, I will see you on the next video.